Imagine you're standing holding your fresh catch when suddenly you get tackled by a policeman into a flowing stream. Sounds absolutely bonkers, doesn't it? Yet these bizarre British laws that sound completely made up were actually enforced, sending people to prison for the most ridiculous reasons. But here's the twist that'll blow your mind. Some of these laws shaped modern Britain in ways you'd never imagine, from creating our entire weekend culture to accidentally legalising things the government desperately wanted banned. Today, we're diving into the most unbelievable British laws that your grandparents lived under. And trust me, number 7 will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about British history. Let's kick off with everyone's favourite bizarre British law, the Salmon Act of 1986. Yes, you heard that right, 1986. Not Victorian times, not medieval England, but the same year Top Gun came out. Section 32 of this act makes it illegal to handle salmon in suspicious circumstances, which sounds like something straight out of a comedy sketch. Now, what constitutes suspicious salmon handling, you might ask? Well, the law was actually targeting illegal fishing and salmon poaching rings. If you received, disposed of, or possessed salmon knowing or believing it was illegally fished, you're breaking the law. The maximum penalty? 2 years in prison for dodgy fish dealings. The really fascinating part is that this law came about because salmon poaching was such a massive problem in the 1980s that organised crime was getting involved. We're talking proper criminal enterprises dealing in black market fish. The Salmon Act consolidated about 30 different pieces of legislation dating back centuries into one modern law. Still sounds barmy though, doesn't it? Since 1313, this one dates back to Edward II's reign when a statute was passed in 1313 forbidding anyone from wearing armour in Parliament. The law specifically states, all persons are prohibited from coming to Parliament with force and arms. The fascinating context here is that medieval Parliament sessions were genuinely dangerous affairs. Lords would arrive with armed retainers and political debates could escalate into actual violence. Simon de Montfort's Parliament in 1265 had seen armed confrontations, and by Edward II's time they'd had enough. The king wanted debates, not sword fights. What's brilliant is that this prohibition has never been formally repealed. It's been expanded over the centuries. No weapons, no armour, and these days you can't even bring in protest banners. So technically, if an MP showed up in chainmail today, they'd be refused entry based on a 711-year-old rule. If you're enjoying these absolutely barmy laws, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because coming up, we've got the bonkers story of political fashion police, why your nan couldn't buy a Bible on Sundays but could get porn mags, and a genuinely disturbing law about dissecting murderers. Trust me, it gets even madder. From the late 17th century through to the 1830s, Britain operated under what historians call the Bloody Code, a legal system with over 200 capital offences by 1815. You could be hanged for crimes including stealing goods worth more than 5 shillings, about £30 today, cutting down someone else's tree, appearing on a high road with a blackened face, interpreted as intent to commit crime, or stealing from a rabbit warren. In 1816, there were actually 225 capital offences on the books. The system peaked in 1783 when 783 people were sentenced to death, though only about a third were actually executed. The rest were transported to Australia or had sentences commuted. The paradox was that juries increasingly refused to convict for minor property crimes, knowing it meant death. This led to pious perjury, where juries would deliberately undervalue stolen goods to below the capital threshold. A stolen sheep worth £2 would be valued at 39 shillings to avoid the death penalty. The last woman executed in Britain was Ruth Ellis in 1955, and capital punishment for murder wasn't fully abolished until 1969, though retained for certain rare offences like piracy with violence until 1998. The history of homosexuality laws in Britain is properly sobering. Male homosexual acts were criminal offences under the Vagrancy Act of 1533, yes, that was its actual name, and remained so for over 400 years. The death penalty for buggery wasn't abolished until 1861, replaced with imprisonment ranging from 10 years to life. The Sexual Offences Act 1967 partially decriminalised homosexual acts between men over 21 in private in England and Wales only. But here's what many don't realise. In private meant only 2 people present. A third person in the house, even in another room, made it illegal again. Scotland didn't follow suit until the Criminal Justice Act 1980, and Northern Ireland was forced to change after Jeff Dudgeon won his case at the European Court of Human Rights in 1981, with decriminalisation following in 1982. The age of consent wasn't equalised at 16 until 2001 in England and Wales, and 2009 in Northern Ireland. Alan Turing, despite his crucial code-breaking work in World War II, was convicted in 1952 and accepted chemical castration rather than prison. He died in 1954, likely by suicide. Since a statute from Edward II's reign, specifically De Prerogativa Regis from 1324, all whales, sturgeons, porpoises and dolphins in British waters or washed up on British shores are fishes royal and property of the monarch. Yes, they called dolphins and whales fishes. Marine biology wasn't their strong suit. This actually still applies today. In 2004, Robert Davies caught a 264-pound sturgeon in Swansea Bay and, following the law, offered it to the Queen through Buckingham Palace. They declined, allowing him to sell it. The Natural History Museum now usually gets first dibs on scientifically interesting specimens on behalf of the Crown. The original reasoning was economic. Whale oil was incredibly valuable for lighting, and ambergris, a waxy substance from sperm whale intestines, was worth more than gold for perfume making. The Crown wanted these resources, so they claimed all great fish as royal property. Specifically banned wearing political uniforms in public. This was Parliament's response to Oswald Mosley's British Union of Fascists parading around in black shirts, and the Communist Party wearing their own uniforms, leading to violent clashes like the Battle of Cable Street in October 1936. The law defines it as wearing uniform signifying association with any political organisation. After the ban, the black shirts tried everything. Black ties, specific coloured sweaters, even black berets. Each workaround led to court cases defining what constituted a uniform. In one case, 7 men wearing black polo necks to a meeting were prosecuted. The Act is still in force and occasionally used. In 2016, Britain First leader Paul Golding was arrested under this Act for wearing a political uniform, green jacket with party logos. The maximum penalty remains 3 months imprisonment or a fine. The Shops Act in 1950 prohibited most Sunday trading in England and Wales, but the exemptions created absolute chaos. You could legally sell newspapers, cigarettes, alcohol in pubs, meals, funeral supplies, fresh milk, cream and clotted cream. But you couldn't sell books, except Bibles, children's toys, clothing or most groceries. The real insanity came with mixed shops. Marks and Spencer famously had to rope off clothing sections while keeping food areas open. W.H. Smith could sell newspapers but had to cover their bookshelves. Garden centres could sell plants. They were perishable, but not garden tools. The £1,000 maximum fine didn't stop major retailers. By the late 1980s, companies like B&Q openly flouted the law, calculating that Sunday profits exceeded the fines. The law finally changed with the Sunday Trading Act 1994, allowing shops under 280 square metres to open any time, and larger shops for 6 hours between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Dissecting murderers as extra punishment. The Murder Act 1752, not 1751 as sometimes cited, declared that executed murderers must be either publicly dissected or hung in chains, gibbeted. The Act stated this was for better preventing the horrid crime of murder by adding some further terror and peculiar mark of infamy. Bodies were delivered warm from the gallows to surgeons' halls where public dissection began immediately. Sometimes the condemned would twitch during initial cuts. Tickets were sold for these anatomical demonstrations. The shortage of murderers' corpses, only about 50 per year against medical schools' needs, requiring hundreds, created the resurrection men trade, body snatchers who dug up fresh graves. This shortage directly caused the Burke and Hare murders in Edinburgh, 1828, where they killed 16 people to sell bodies to Dr. Robert Knox. The outcry led to the Anatomy Act 1832, which ended mandatory dissection of murderers but allowed unclaimed bodies from workhouses to be used instead. After 8 a.m., Section 54 of the Metropolitan Police Act. 1839 prohibits beating or shaking carpets, rugs or mats, except doormats, before 8 a.m. in the streets of the Metropolitan Police District. The fine was originally 40 shillings, roughly £200 in today's money. Victorian London's air quality was already terrible from coal fires and horse manure. Carpet beating released clouds of dust, soot, and likely tuberculosis bacteria into the air. The 8 a.m. doormat exemption recognised that people needed to clean their entrance mats before the streets got busy. This law remains in force. In 2006, a builder's merchant in London was prosecuted under Section 54 for shaking a dusty mat in the street at lunchtime, receiving a £200 fine. The magistrate noted the law might be old, but was still good law. The Contagious Diseases Acts 1864, 1866 and 1869 applied to specific garrison towns and ports, allowing police to arrest women suspected of prostitution and force them to undergo fortnightly internal examinations for venereal disease. If infected, women were detained in lock hospitals for up to 9 months. Any woman out alone after dark near military areas could be targeted. Middle-class feminist Josephine Butler led opposition, arguing these acts created surgical rape by the state. The campaign against them was one of the first mass women's political movements in Britain, with over 17,000 attending protest meetings by 1870. The acts were suspended in 1883 and repealed in 1886, but their legacy has shaped both feminist organising and public health policy. They demonstrated how Victorian moral panic about sexuality translated into laws that criminalised women's independence. Also, under Section 54 of the Metropolitan Police Act 1839, it's illegal to carry or convey any ladder, plank, pole, showboard, placard along pavements. This wasn't random Victorian fussiness. It addressed a genuine, deadly problem. London's narrow pavements meant workmen carrying long planks on their shoulders would spin around, sending pedestrians flying into the road where horse-drawn vehicles killed about 200 people annually. Contemporary accounts describe plank carriers as urban terrors, especially outside construction sites. Modern prosecutions still occur. In 2010, a carpenter in Westminster was fined £150 for carrying a wooden board along Oxford Street. The law technically applies to protest placards too, though police rarely enforce this unless they want to shut down a demonstration. Legalised betting shops, but insisted they be as unwelcoming as possible to discourage loitering. The law specifically prohibited comfortable seating, refreshments, even water, televisions or radios, and even somewhere to write your bet. Shop windows had to be blocked so you couldn't see inside or outside. The intent was to create fleeting visit establishments where punters placed bets and immediately left. This led to the term flea pits. Deliberately horrible spaces you wanted to escape. These restrictions weren't lifted until the Gambling Act 2005. For 45 years, British betting shops were legally required to be miserable. Today's comfortable bookmakers with sofas, sports screens and coffee machines would have been illegal before 2005. Absolutely gobsmacked yet? We're only halfway through. Still to come. Why builders can't carry planks, the betting shop designed to be horrible, and wartime laws that prosecuted people because their cat's eyes were too shiny. Seriously, don't forget to hit that like button if you're as shocked as I am. The Defence Regulations of 1939 made showing light during blackout hours a criminal offence punishable by fines up to £500, about £30,000 today, or imprisonment. By 1940, over 300,000 blackout prosecutions had occurred. The enforcement reached absurd levels. Real prosecutions included a woman fined for light escaping when her parrot lifted its cage cover, a man prosecuted because light reflected off his greenhouse glass, and someone charged because their chicken coop door blew open, revealing a heat lamp. The most ridiculous case involved a Nottingham man prosecuted because his white shirt was too visible in moonlight. The magistrate ruled that while not technically light emission, it violated the spirit of making Britain invisible to enemy aircraft. From the Licensing Act 1737 until the Theatres Act 1968, every public theatrical performance required approval from the Lord Chamberlain's office. This wasn't just checking for swearing. They controlled everything from political content to costume details. Censorship decisions were bizarre and inconsistent. The word pissed was banned, but drunk as a lord was fine. You couldn't depict living members of the royal family, but dead ones were acceptable. References to any bodily functions were forbidden, making some Shakespeare difficult to perform uncut. The system finally collapsed when the Royal Court Theatre staged Edward Bond's Early Morning in 1968, featuring Queen Victoria in a lesbian relationship with Florence Nightingale and cannibalism involving various political figures. Rather than prosecute and create more publicity, Parliament abolished theatrical censorship entirely. The Master and Servant Act, 1867, consolidating earlier acts from 1747 onwards, made breach of employment contract a criminal offence for workers, but only a civil matter for employers. Over 10,000 prosecutions occurred annually in the 1860s. Workers could receive 3 months hard labour for leaving work without permission, being absent without leave, even if sick, refusing to work overtime when ordered, or impertinence to employers. Meanwhile, employers who didn't pay wages faced only civil lawsuits workers couldn't afford. The Act wasn't fully repealed until the Employers and Workmen Act 1875, which finally made employment disputes civil matters for both parties. Until then, being working class literally meant risking criminal prosecution for industrial action. The Street Offences Act 1959 made it an offence for a common prostitute to loiter or solicit in public. The problematic bit was proving who was a common prostitute and what constituted loitering. Police used the 2 strikes rule. 2 convictions for soliciting automatically labelled you a common prostitute in official records forever, affecting everything from housing applications to child custody. Women reported being arrested for waiting at bus stops alone, window shopping after dark, or having a cigarette outside a pub. The Act remained largely unchanged until 2009. The Policing and Crime Act 2009 finally removed the term common prostitute and introduced rehabilitation courses instead of automatic criminal records. The Obscene Publications Act 1959 created the test of whether material would deprave and corrupt those likely to read it. This led to the famous 1960 trial of Penguin Books for publishing D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover. The prosecutor, Mervyn Griffith-Jones, famously asked the jury, "Is it a book you would wish your wife or servants to read?" He then counted the swear words aloud. 30 fucks or fucking, 14 cunts, 13 balls, 6 shits, and 4 arses. The jury acquitted, and Penguin sold 3 million copies within months. The unintended consequence was that to prosecute obscenity, the supposedly corrupting material had to be read aloud in open court, creating public records more explicit than the original works. Court transcripts from obscenity trials became accidentally pornographic government documents. The Vagrancy Act 1824 remains partially enforced, creating offences of being idle and disorderly, or a rogue and vagabond. You could be arrested for sleeping rough, begging, playing or betting in public, or possessing any implement of housebreaking, which included common tools. Section 4 created the offence of being armed with any gun, pistol, hanger, cutlass, bludgeon or other offensive weapon with intent to commit an arrestable offence. Problem was, offensive weapon included work tools, hammers, screwdrivers, Stanley knives. If police decided you looked suspicious, despite multiple attempts, the Act hasn't been fully repealed. In 2022, over 1,000 people were still prosecuted under it. The government announced plans to repeal it in 2023, but as of late 2024, it remains on the statute books. 200 years of criminalising poverty and counting. So there you have it. 18 absolutely barmy British laws that were devastatingly real. From suspicious salmon in the Thatcher years to making poverty literally illegal, these laws shaped modern Britain in ways you'd never imagine. Your grandparents couldn't shop on Sundays, your parents lived under homosexuality bans, and some of these laws are still enforceable today. What's truly mental is that every generation thinks their laws are perfectly sensible. Makes you wonder what we're doing now that'll seem completely bonkers in 50 years, doesn't it? If this journey through Britain's legal madness has blown your mind, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Next week, we're diving into the most mental British military regulations that'll leave you absolutely gobsmacked. Drop a comment with which law shocked you most. I read every single one. Until then, handle your salmon confidently and leave the armour at home. Cheers.